Looks like
You want to go ahead and start, Kathleen?
I'm gonna say it looks like people are here. Hi, everyone. My name is Kathleen Salinas, and I'm the program manager of the Brentwood Arts Center. I thank you and welcome you to our virtual auditorium for BAC's Conversation on Art series with our host, Meg Linton, and guest artist, Alexis Zoto. Our executive director, Amy Gantman, regrets that she can't be here today, but joins me in welcoming you. It has been a challenging time for the world and for the BAC as we transitioned our offerings to a virtual format, which allowed BAC to continue to fulfill its mission of providing high-quality arts educational opportunities to students of all ages. Our success is due to our incredible and generous board of directors, leadership council, donors, staff, faculty, and students who support the BAC through thick and thin. The pandemic has also allowed us to experiment with new technology and create programs like Conversations on Art. And I thank our anonymous donor who has made this series possible for the next 12 months. We can only do all that we do because of our generous donors who believe everyone should have access to the arts and education. We'd like to be sure to mention that the new BAC campus in Santa Monica, located at 1625 West Olympic Boulevard, is open and spring classes have begun. The campus is in close proximity to 18th Street, Crossroads School, and a metro stop is nearby. We're excited to offer in-person classes once again this spring 2023 term, so your contributions and enrollments in our courses are more important than ever. Our host, Meg Linton, and BAC Executive Director Amy Gantman met at Otis College of Art and Design, while Meg was the Director of Exhibitions for the Ben Maltz Gallery, and Amy was the Dean of Continuing Education. The divisions collaborated on many public programs, and we are thrilled to bring Meg's love and respect for artists to the BAC. Meg has been visiting artist studios for over 20 years in her various roles as a director and curator of contemporary art spaces in the Central and Southern California region. Currently, Meg is the lead producer on a documentary film about performance art in Los Angeles in the 1970s and 1980s called Acting Like Women, directed by Sherry Galkey. She's also working on an exhibition about the life and work of artist Keith Julius Puccinelli, writing a novel, and of course, conversing with Alexis Zoto for the BAC this afternoon. Welcome, Meg.
Thank you, Kathleen. It's a pleasure to be here. If you haven't already, I want to encourage everyone to give to the BAC's Be Building campaign. It's now open, it's beautiful, and your gift makes learning, creating, and self-expressing possible. I also want to thank those donors who have given to the campaign in honor of this program. I, our guest artists, and all the BAC staff say thank you, and we thank our anonymous donor for making this program possible. It's May 5th, and most of us associate it with Cinco de Mayo. But did you know that this week, the LA County Board of Supervisors just passed a motion that today is a National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous People. And I just wanted to mention it because I think it's very important. It is also Buddha's birthday. In Japan, it's National Children's Day, the Kodomo no Hi. It's International Midwives Day, National Museum Lovers Day, Astronauts Day, Cartoonist Day, Tuba Day, and for Star Wars fans, it's the Revenge of the Fifth Day. But for us at the BAC, it's Alexis Zoto Day. We're super excited to have her here. And I just want to thank you all for sharing this prodigious and celebratory Friday with us. Welcome to Conversations on Art and our virtual studio visit with Alexis Zoto. But first, we have the usual housekeeping before we start chatting. We are recording today's presentation, and we ask that you please mute your microphones and turn off your video because it prevents feedback. And then during the conversation, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box, and I will either work them into the discussion or save them for the end. In the chat box, you'll also see that we've put some additional information about our guest for you to peruse on your own, and there's also instructions on how to save the chat information. So Alexis Zoto has been described as a cultural trailblazer by the Department of Cultural Affairs, and is an artist, designer, researcher, and professor and chair of 3D design at the USC Roski School of Art and Design. I first saw her work in 2004 at a gallery on Venice Boulevard run by Elisabetta Bistinsky. will see images of that installation today, and I was so charmed by the delicacy and power of the experience she created. Since then, she has become a devoted and published scholar on the subject of Albanian kilims, textiles, and weavers. Her cultural heritage has woven its way into her work literally and metaphorically, and I'm thrilled to have her here with us today. So welcome, Alexis.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, so I just thought we'd jump in. We wanted to start with your tools.
Yes. This is a small table loom that I got for Christmas a couple years ago. And it's one way of weaving. But the one that you had the picture of previously is a tapestry loom that I use a lot.
And that's more of a vertical.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
It's very portable, and I can sit on the couch with my children while they watch TV. But this
Great.
this is made on a more complex loom. So again, this is more focused on patterns and color, which is a very different way of working than on the tapestry loom. And it's really fun to sort of use these different techniques and get to know them and experiment. And this is
What of your experimentations?
yes,
On the wall.
yes, because I have had a problem with studio space. This is my dining room, which actually I'm sitting in right now. And that's a giant piece of foam core. And that is a piece that I made using upcycling dry cleaning bags. And so I spun the plastic to make yarn that I wove, and then also the long tassels.
Now, when you're spinning, all right, I mean, I immediately think of like a spinning wheel, but
Everything I use is super ancient, very accessible. So I use a drop spindle, which has been around for millennia.
Yeah.
It's very, it's easy to use. It just takes a little bit to get the hang of it. And that's a more recent picture of my studio. So it's been a very tragic saga. We had a plumbing accident disaster before COVID. And then I had to take everything out of the studio, and then the rains came and I discovered I had a giant leak. And so again, we couldn't quite move in. And so just now it's almost done. The repairs are almost done, and I'm looking forward to moving back into my garage studio this summer.
That'll be great. That's why you were talking about spring cleaning earlier.
Yes.
Yes.
And this is what my studio looked like a while ago, 2014.
Before the tragedy.
Yes, before the tragedy. But you can see I had an inkling of it. There's holes in the ceiling because there was something funny going on. That was before the big disaster.
Yeah, we always like showing pictures of the studio space just to give people kind of a sense of your workspace. So this is actually the first installation I saw of your work.
Yes, I made that when I was very pregnant.
So you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yes. I was pregnant with my daughter, who's now 18, and I at that time, my pregnancy was like very beautiful and joyous, and I felt very creative throughout except for the morning sickness in the beginning. But and I was delving into my identity and heritage, and I was pulling from a lot of different imagery that I had been exposed to through my life. And so it was like family trees and literally and figuratively. And then the couch was, this love seat was reminiscent of a kind of furniture that was in my grandmother's house, along with the blue. And what you can't see in the photo is I actually drew a mural, because she had a mural wallpaper, but I drew something that was from the Getty that was of that same time, that it's like referencing that particular style. And then the birds were, just thinking of all the ancestors, but also birds are messengers. Birds have different kinds of symbology depending upon the culture. that you're thinking of, but I was thinking of spirits, but also a lot of times it's referenced in art history, like depictions in Christianity. And also it was used in ancient Greece for telling the future.
Yeah. Yeah, because they really thought that the birds could travel between worlds. Yeah. And then so what's the design, the gold on the back? Because
Yes, that was
going to be really key going forward.
Yes, that was, you know, thinking of, again, referencing this Mediterranean motif that you know, has both, you know, you'll see it if you go to, let's say, Greek restaurants, and it can be very kitschy, but it's also kind of beloved at the same time. And also it's kind of like, so it became like this drawing, and it became again like this expanding system that just could go on infinitely with these that kind of curly Q, but it's also like a Greek key. And then again, it's like a spiral, and it kind of gets into all these other fun things.
Yeah.
And that was at the Palm Springs Art Museum. That was actually for a project for Day of the Dead. And that was really a wonderful experience. And again, I was using the tree again, but this time I used a table because the table was, you know, thinking of, again, gathering of family, thinking of Day of the Dead and honoring ancestors. And, you know, again, these branches of history and life and family. And the chandelier is another thing that I have used quite a bit, because it's also like it's both something aspirational to acquire, but it's also, you know, a source of light. It's a source of culture. And also, I think for me, the other thing that I like about it sort of being low is that it's, you know, something that is for smaller people, you know, like, you know, kids. I remember being small and hiding behind furniture, going under the table. And so it's, you know, also this kind of, that's what I was thinking of. And then all the boxes on the table are, you know, a reference literally to Pandora and Pandora's box and the myth of Pandora.
And you seem to really appreciate mythology.
Yes.
In Greek mythology, but also we'll be talking more about other cultures that your Albanian heritage.
Yes.
Yeah. And
so that's
all of that.
The one on the left, Juliana's Prayer, was named after my mother. And again, using the table, it was the idea of having a vision, or because in my family, a lot of the women have a gift and sometimes have visions. And I wanted to have this idea of the Virgin appearing, but covered in evil eyes. But when I came up with the idea, I was absolutely terrified, because I did not want my grandmother to think I was being blasphemous. I should say that I was raised in the Albanian Orthodox Church. And so I asked her what she thought of that. And she was like, oh yeah, it's fine. Go do it. And
it's also the evil eye, but it's also known as the goddess eye too.
Right.
Yeah. So it has a positive connotation depending on where you are.
Yes. And it's also the Virgin is a reference to the goddess. But the other thing is the tree branches are wrapped in gold lace. And again, it's more about like, again, reaching out and family trees. And then the one on the right, Lecky Wants to Be Special, is again, using the eye. I kind of went through a big thing where like everything I made had to have an eye for protection. And that's kind of changed in different ways as I've progressed. But that was a story about Lecky and what she wants and her desires. And so again, it was referencing the tree, the hot pink. It was like a day glow pink. And then the piece of furniture had peacock feathers, which it doesn't look like it because it's not the eye peacock, but it's actually the ones that come out before you get to that eye shape at the end, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's aspiring to be acknowledged and seen.
Yeah, it's almost like it's the little furry parts of the plume. Yeah.
And that's like the whole installation at the gallery at Overtones, with the beautiful gold wall.
Yeah.
And yeah. Oh,
And
this,
your patterning.
yeah, this was when I really got more into looking at rugs and kilims. And I was invited to be part of this group exhibition. The owner of this house was getting ready to remodel, and she offered to invite artists to come in to do a very, very brief alternative kind of exhibition, which I love that kind of thing. It's always been my favorite kind of way to work. And so I chose this room, and then I thought about putting a lot of the motifs that I was using are in kilims that are aspirational for brides. So sometimes it's about wealth, it's about wanting, abundance, protection. So a lot of these things, and at this time I was still kind of getting to know this field. And so it's a mixture of Anatolian as well as motifs that I had seen in Albanian kilims. But I didn't really know as much as I know now.
Yeah. So was there a moment where it's like you were attracted to these patterns, but then did you have that moment where it's like, I really need to know about these if I'm going to use them?
Yes, that became a big dilemma, because how can I use these motifs when I don't really understand them and don't know the history? And then I have a really amazing family, and I was at a family reunion years back, and at a cousin's house, and she had this book that kind of started the whole thing off. That's by this guy named Roski, and it's about Albanian kilims, and it was written in this like late 60s in Albania. So the information is kind of strange, but it's like got these beautiful lithographs. Anyway, so that kind of started the whole thing. And then another cousin showed me a kilim that belonged to my great grandmother, and that led to even more of a bigger rabbit hole too, in terms of like trying to understand and learn. And it's an ongoing process. Frankly, it's been hard to get information.
Well, because there isn't that much published, right?
Correct. And also because of the history of what happened in Albania, a lot of things got lost. So,
Right.
but also that motif, the bright yellow one, also I used, that was from an embroidery that was my grandmother did. And it's, it was like on a pillowcase. And then so I changed it into a giant scale and into vinyl. And so that motif also, I used another version of that in a project at LAX.
Oh,
And yeah. And that was a piece for, I was thinking about my son when I made that. And using, these are like old toys that I got that are like sun bleached, because he was crazy for trucks. And so it was him growing up and using those materials. And a lot of things that you may notice is that I like to use a lot of things that you find in your house, and also just stuff that's trying to upcycle and reuse things as much as possible. So
yeah, thinking about your work in terms of the domestic space, in terms of the people who pass through it, the makers, the material, like everything that kind of comes through the kitchen door, right?
yeah, yes. And also I think the women in my life were so powerful and influential, and just I am so eternally grateful for them. And so they, I think a lot of that is just trying to elevate what they do. I mean, it's always amazing what women can do and have done. This was a great project that was in Italy that, and so the motif in red that you see on the sort of right side of that space was a motif that belonged to my great grandmother's kilim. And this was the other thing that I found so fascinating and curious, was that that's identified as a mosque motif. And I was like, why? My great grandmother was Orthodox. Like, why would she have a kilim with mosques all over it? Like, what is that about? And so that sort of question led me to trying to investigate even more. And as you can see, the chandelier appears again. And then I have a plaster cast, I don't know, it's like a putti, like a little cherubic boy, and there's grapes, and you see that it's kind of like, it's kitschy, but it's also, beloved, and you see that a lot in I guess in certain circles, and certainly was around where I was growing up amongst the diaspora community. So in different forms, sometimes it was ceramic, sometimes it was, concrete or other things. So I wanted to use that. And then I embellished it with Swarovski crystals and painted it. And, and then the rest is gold mylar. And then there's a motif on the left that's hot pink. That's like, kind of looks like a heart, but it also kind of looks like a goddess.
Yeah. So
And
with some of the motifs, do they have, like you said, the red one was the mosque motif, but do some of the other ones, do they have these kind of mystical meanings? Or, there is a lot about protection that I know that shows up.
Right.
Yeah.
It's been very interesting, and it's been a journey to kind of figure this out, because in my research in Albania, a lot of the motifs, the original meaning was sort of removed and replaced with, in my estimation, a lot of dogma. So, or it was like, this is a geometric motif. And it's like, well, it's abstracted. It's obviously referencing something. So, I mean, in some things you're like, oh, it would be identified as like a bread loaf or a biscuit or a belt or something like that. But some things was just like, it's a rhombus. It's like, well, and then when you'd ask, they would say, well, why does it have to mean anything? It's like, well,
yeah.
kind of got into interesting conversations, and I tried my best to have conversations. I really didn't mean to offend people, but I think some people were offended by that. But
Oh,
but this
where the landmines are.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
yeah.
This one is, I used doodles from my husband. My husband loves to doodle when he works, and he would throw all these amazing drawings out. And then there was some in there from my son. And so I made a collage and then drew on top of it, and with using, again, the motifs that I was researching. And the one that's the yellow one that's repeating is referred to as open and close motif. And the one that has like the white rectangles in it is, God, I'm thinking of the word in Albania, but I think it's like a belt motif. It's a pafta, I think is what it's called. And then the pink one did not have an identification, but I keep thinking of it as a heart / goddess symbol because of the way it looks, but I have no proof on that.
Well, it seems like in some of the research you're doing, you could actually be naming things.
I would not, I'm a little scared to do that, but so this was like how, when I was making these, how they would kind of be in my studio as I was working on them. And so some pieces, like the ones below the one we had just discussed in the previous slide, those are like trash that I got at school at USC in the printmaking. I would take this really great paper that was, it was a mistake or a bad print, and I would take it and use it for my own work. And so like make ready. And so there's a few of those in this, and then and again, just playing with the motifs and trying to change the scale and the materials in a way that you would never see in the rug form, the textile form. Also, I love pink, as you can tell.
You have a very bright palette.
Yeah. This project, it was at LAX not too long ago. This was in the Southwest Terminal. It was an amazing experience. I love working at the airport. I love being able to be in spaces to communicate in a different way that's outside of like a traditional art kind of space. So again, I was using motifs specifically from my research, changing the color, changing the scale, and also mixing regions, because even though Albania is a very tiny country about the size of Maryland, the state of Maryland, it has you know, all these different styles all over the place because it's very mountainous and all of its history. And so it's basically house paint, vinyl, to answer your question, Sherry, I saw that, house paint, vinyl, and Mylar. And
is it still there?
no, not,
It
it's
was
gone.
temporary. Okay.
Yeah, that's the other thing that I love about working at the airport, to be able to like have something, it only existed in that space, and, you know, it'd be fun to think about how you would do it in a different space or do it in tile or something else. But yeah, it was really fun. And also just, it's like kind of a weird wedge shape, and how do you address that giant public space and how do you make an impact? So all those things were really fun problems to solve.
Did you get any public feedback?
I did, but one of the best compliments I got was that the people who worked there and saw it day in and day out enjoyed it, which was really great. Also, some of my students who happened to be at the airport were like, "Oh my God, I saw your work." So that was also really great. So I was really happy for that.
But it's interesting for the people who, it's like the security guards at the museum, they get a completely different experience than the people
Yes.
who come in for an hour or just walk by it, because they really look at it
Yeah.
hours and for days, and your perception changes in it, and the relationship can grow and deepen with the work. It's really kind of amazing.
Yeah, I also think like that's another thing that I thought very carefully about was anytime you are installing, at least for me, installing in some place like the airport, and thinking about like who, you know, to be able to get like something immediately, quickly looking at it, and like to be rewarded if you decide to like investigate further, but also, you know, I think that that was something to really think about. And also thinking about travel and, you know, there's a giant window when you look at that mural to the left of it, and you can see like the big tail of Southwest, which is also very bold colors. I mean, it's on that left side there. And so like, that was another sort of thing, like kind of thinking about that visually in relationship to the mural.
And this is the sketch for it.
This was my model, my maquette, yes. And as you can see, it was a lot more maximalist, but I had to pare it back because of budget. I am really good at going over budget. So this was originally what I originally had planned, and I had cut all of it down. So it was like 1 inch to 1 foot scale.
Yeah.
Model. So that's like, I installed that piece in quarantine, and then quarantine, I just like was super, like went crazy with projects, cyanotypes, monoprinting in my kitchen. And then I made, these are like some of the books to the left. I made photo books of like walking and seeing, you know, things that caught my eye, whether it was like, there was one that was like just all gloves that I found everywhere walking around, or masks I found everywhere walking around, or bird feathers, things like that. So I just,
it seems like during quarantine, everyone got really familiar with their neighborhood.
yeah,
It was
true.
Yep.
Very true. Also, back to the mural thing, like when we were installing, again, it was during quarantine and we had to install at night, and literally I felt like I was like at the beginning of a horror movie because it was so quiet and like so eerie, and you just hear like these weird noises from like just, stuff.
Building, yeah.
It's just so you're like there from like 10 at night until like 3 a.m. Oh yeah, so this is more quarantine stuff. So that's one of my spindles on the left. And so I also painted a mural in my house. And those are some tapestries that are there in my house that I made for that was part of a project that we're going to get to later. But
With your spindle, so
yeah.
is that plastic? Is it?
No, it's wood. It's
No,
wood.
but I mean the red.
Oh, that's it's a bandana,
Oh, okay.
like a nasty old bandana. I washed it and then I cut it so that I could then turn it into.
Do you have to stitch the edges together, or do you
No.
just twist them and roll them
Yeah,
together?
you just twist it. Yeah.
Nice. Cool.
Yeah.
I've never done spinning, so.
Oh, you should try it. It's really fun.
Yeah, I've been very
You
curious
do-
about it.
You can do it with paper. You can do it with all kinds of stuff. Oh, yeah. And then, yeah, weaving during quarantine. So that was also weaving. So these are on that tapestry loom that we talked about at the beginning. And I was again using, so this has at the bottom that red bandana, and there's roving, there's a shoelace, there's, just, I was using a lot of stuff that was around the house, like even
Just yarn, the big
Yeah.
puffy parts, yeah.
Yeah, but it was like a lot of stuff that like my, from old craft projects that my kids had, and like just random stuff, kitchen yarn, like kitchen string, like all kinds of weird stuff that you just find because you're in your house and you're just like bored. So I was playing with that. Yeah, and this also has more of that kind of, there's another shoelace and more acrylic kinds of yarn, and I'm playing with, different kinds of shapes and color. And also negative space, like there's a big cut in it right there in the top quarter. And also at the bottom, my daughter had done finger weaving, and I took that and I incorporated that. I mean, from like years ago, because I hold, like I save everything my children make. And so like, I was like, oh, I'm going to use that. I asked her first.
How do they feel about you using their stuff?
They think I'm weird. But they're used to it now. They're like, why do you take pictures of that? Why do you want that? Why do you, and so like, this is using their jeans, old jeans that, got wrecked, and I cut those and used that. And those are artificial pearls, and there's some chenille and plastic twine. So it's like a real mix of stuff. And this one I used black cotton as the warp. So that was really fun to try to incorporate jewels.
So do these go together quickly for you? Are you working on more than one at a time? Was this just like moving through material and color composition and texture, or?
Yeah, well, that's the thing that's really fascinating to me about weaving, is that it's both 2D and 3D, and you think about color and texture and form. And so, during quarantine, I was able to make them, pretty quickly. Now, not so much because of, life, but it's so they were all just like, I would have an idea in my head, or I'd have certain colors that I was like thinking about putting together, and then I would just kind of riff as I was making it. And part of that came from the research, because like I met weave, like historically, like there was a song, there's like I am, the idea of weaving and telling a story, or telling a story through weaving. And so like I was really inspired by that, learning about that when I was doing the working in Albania. So that led to this project, the series of the Mashallah and Masha'Allah, which is I grew up hearing it my whole life. And I'm sure other people have heard it. And it's, it's a desire for protection, wishing for protection on someone or something. And as I got into thinking about it, because I was thinking about the eye and things like that, and you're in quarantine and you want protection for everybody.
Mhm.
And I learned that this, was across the Mediterranean world, but it was also went even beyond that. And so that's so I started doing it in other languages. So that's the Arabic version, but in English. And then I did one in English, but it also is how it's spelled in Albanian. I did one in Greek, one in Arabic. So that's the one that's English. And
So what does it translate as?
it depends. Like in Greek, it's whatever is God's desire.
Mhm.
But it's usually it's with or God's will, or God's will is kind of what it means, but that's what it's used in those kinds of things, like of wanting to have God's will or protection or something like that. This is in Turkish. And again, I love playing with color and texture, obviously, and playing with pattern.
What's the band across the top? The chevron.
That's a part of a dog harness. I washed it, of course, but I just, it was used and wrecked. And so I saved the parts that were working, and I just thought it was a really pretty colors, and that's how I used it.
Well, I love it too, because there is a tradition of taking old rugs that have the edges or whatever and cutting them up and then repurposing them.
Yeah.
Taking multiple rugs and stitching them all together and kind of, yeah.
And in fact, the smaller looms that, for example, the one I'm using, you would have to sew the pieces together. And so a lot of times when you see older rugs and kilims, you'll see 3 long panels that are sewn together because people didn't have access to the really wide looms. So the other series I've done a bunch is about women's rights. And so this was inspired by a bunch of things. One is the idea of lady business, but also I was thinking also about how Amy Poehler, I don't know why, but the idea of lady business, ladies business. Also, it's a euphemism for women's reproductive organs. And so that was sort of thinking about all of that. And then I made more that were about that topic. And this is Masha Allah in Arabic. That one had a lot of beautiful ribbons in it. And this one is that you can see. Mm-hmm. I spun it, but I left a little bit out so that you could see it. It's like a sheer ribbon. Whoops. I'm sorry. Can you hear my dog?
Oh, that's okay.
Sorry, let me put my earbuds in. And this one, there we go. This one is in Northern Macedonian and has velvet ribbons in it, and also nylon, like a nylon twine, and then of course part of the dog harness. And this is it in Greek, whatever is God's desire. And then another kind of series I was thinking about that I'm still kind of in the middle is using Albanian phrases. So, and I kind of want some of I have heard before and some I haven't, that I just was researching. And so here's one that the idea of the grass isn't always greener, but in Albanian, it's every forest has pigs. And I just like that a lot.
How do you actually say it?
I will try, but I have a really hard time with the Y sound. So it's sto pu cadera. The Y is really hard to say, or hard for me to say. I have to get better at it.
How fluent are you?
Not very. I studied, I took a class I studied over the pandemic online, and so I learned a lot about the language, and the language is really fascinating. It always has been since I was little, and because I heard it growing up all the time. But yeah, that's a goal, to learn how to speak it much better than I do. This is again back to the series. So like this is kind of showing you how my brain like kind of goes back and forth between different ideas, but I'm like they're all in there at the same time. It's just like,
So it wasn't like you just did one series and finished that. It's like all of this is happening as you're making it and thinking
it's
about
all together at the same time. So like I have like 3 series going at once. So this one is again referencing the assault on women's rights, and just this one, the thing that I really like about this one is that it not only is made with clothing that belonged to my children, but the warp thread, which is like a blue white, that was something that my daughter space dyed. And so then I asked her if I could have her leftovers, and she said yes. And so then I used it in here.
It's great.
Yeah, because I want her to keep her rights.
Yes.
This one was just how I was feeling at that moment. And that's like the picture of me working on it, was the promo that you had in the front. And just, I think I was thinking a lot about women and how it's the pressure to try to have it all, try to do it all, have the career, have the family, and the, or whatever it is, like trying to have all these things, and how hard it can be and overwhelming it can be to try to do all of it and to aspire to try to do all of it. And sometimes you're just like, oh my God, can I give up? I give up. Can I give up? Can I give up on greatness?
Yes.
It's like, so that's what I was thinking of at that time.
How's your daughter looking at this body of work? Does she
I
look
haven't.
at work? Have you had conversations about it at all?
I haven't asked her what she thought about it, to be honest. I mean, she's around it all the time, and sometimes we make stuff together. We like collage together and do other things together, but I've never really asked her what her thoughts are. I mean, because that piece you showed like way back when we were first talking and when we first met, like that was about her. And it's named for her. It's called Athenaya, and my daughter's name is Athena. And so I've never talked to her about it. I don't know. Maybe I should.
Is she showing signs of being an artist?
Oh yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, both of my children, I'm very lucky. Both of them are very creative. And my husband's creative too. I'm very lucky. So this is another one that was, again, thinking about both feeling fragile, like both assault on women's rights, but also just this challenging times that we're living in. And I think as a mother and a teacher, like you try to be strong for others, but a lot of times you just have to acknowledge that you still feel fragile. You still feel vulnerable, even though you try to be strong for others and try to be strong for yourself.
Have you shown these?
No. I showed the mashallah ones. Those have been seen, but not these. I'm Not Yours. That's another one that's about the assault on women's rights. And yes, I love pink. I really do. It's like really in my face. Like I don't think about it at the time, but I really do. This was a really fun challenge that I gave myself, to use a lot of trash. So not only are there ribbons, but just like weird stuff that I found, like going through things like Mylar packaging and plastic packaging and different kinds of foam and plastic and dirty, like stained shoelaces, and there's just like all kinds of weird stuff in there.
Is that a BB chain?
Yeah,
One of those, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
awesome. I know for a while I had so many like little keychains when I was a kid, and like the keychain part would fall away and I just have all these little bits of BB
uh-huh.
thread. Now I know what to do with it.
So this is in Albanian, and this one is another saying, and this is one that I got from my mother, who said that she heard this from her mother, my grandmother, who I adored. And it's a coca ben coca pasoy, and coca is head. So the head does, the head follows, which essentially is like the idea of like you reap what you sow. And so I, again, thinking about this moment, but also thinking about myself, thinking about my children.
Mhm. How big are these?
So well, this one's 18 by 19. So they're about that size. Some of them are more pokey, or they stick out more than others, but because I use a loom that's like I can fit on my lap. So so they're not that big, but they are they're a lot of fun to make, and they're little gems. And I want to say that I have a big loom that I'm very excited to be able to use once I get in my studio.
Yeah, that's going to be great. But we were talking before when we were prepping for this conversation about you were talking about how wonderful it was to have this smaller loom and accessibility, and you had done some group weaving, or there was something where you were working with people.
Well, first of all, I attended a workshop that was really amazing, taught by Cameron Taylor. Oh my gosh, I'm spacing on her last name, but she's a wonderful instructor. And so I learned how to she taught more complex loom. The thing that I like about this, I'm going to be probably doing a workshop through USC, but what I love about this kind of work is that it is so easy for anyone to jump in and play with it. Because I use a plastic fork, because we all have them, and they're all like piled up somewhere in your kitchen, to beat down the yarn. You can use kitchen string or whatever you have, yarn, craft yarn, and you can use like a basic old picture frame. You could even do it with like a piece of cardboard and then notch it, and just whatever materials you have laying around, and you could even do it with cuttings from your garden. I mean, that's what I deeply love about this, is that anyone can have fun and play with color and texture and pattern and form, and it's really a great way of working. So this is the piece that I'm working on right now, which has these really weird pinks that I'm kind of digging on, and also a bright green shoelace. And this one is going to be an Albanian one that's going to be called Vech Privet.
What does that mean?
Like only for myself, I think. Yeah, only for myself. Which again is the idea of thinking about women, and the idea of having things that are just for yourself. Mm-hmm. This is some of the, so I sketch things that I do for like that are big projects, but like when I'm weaving, I have an image in my head, or I have an idea in my head, but I don't actually sketch it. But I do lots of sketching, and I sketch lots of different ideas, and I'm just like playing around with stuff. And sometimes I'm into letters, sometimes, and then I have another book that's completely for collages, like you just showed.
Right.
I have crazy playing with color and pattern. And so a lot of times I think maybe the reason why I do that also is to help me work out ideas for the textiles. But I love playing with that. And it's very immediate and instant gratification. And I get to do it sometimes with my daughter, which is lovely. Yeah, that's more playing with the collage. Also, during the pandemic time or the quarantine time, I would put them as my background when I was teaching to kind of mix it up, entertain myself and others.
So are you back 100% in person?
Oh, yeah.
Now teaching?
Oh yeah, we have been for a while, yes, which is great. I love being around people. So it's also really, really hard to teach studio classes via Zoom. It's really hard,
Yeah.
very challenging. So this is what I wanted to share with you, is that the other part of my life, in addition to making all this stuff, is I do the research, which I had talked about in between as we were going through the slides. And so I have been publishing. I just was in Seattle at a conference sharing research that I did in diaspora communities in Boston and Worcester, Massachusetts. And I have been trying to meet other Albanians and asking them if they have family heirlooms they're willing to share with me about and what they know about them. And so this particular one belongs I think that belongs to somebody I met in Massachusetts. But the thing that was also really interesting is you see this motif inside there. And, you know, one of the weavers I met in Albania was like, oh, that's a horse. And I'm like, really? You sure that's a horse? And she's like, yeah, it's like the old horse mosque. Yeah, it is. And I was like, really? And my thought is that my theory, although I don't, like I said, don't have any hard proof, but I'd like to think that it's a hoopoe bird, which is actually it's in Albania, in that particular region where this motif shows up. And it's used in a lot of textiles also in Egypt. And so as part of that sort of Ottoman world. And so that is my hunch, but I don't have any proof.
Yeah, but it takes someone like you to be looking to kind of make the connections and to maybe change the stories, because these stories get passed down and they morph, and people lose the reason why that, you know, the story just morphs. It's like telephone, right? So so then when you come back and give it a fresh perspective and be looking at the landscape, that's why it's sometimes so important to go to the environment.
I think the other thing that's really cool about doing this work is oftentimes it's women who are the keepers of these heirlooms. And they often, you know, will tell stories. And sometimes, like, I would meet women and they're like, oh, this belonged to my mother, my grandmother. I have no idea. I just keep it. I have no idea what it means. And then there's others that, you know, display them. And then a lot of times you're in these communities and other stories will come out about like, for example, stories that can be very heartbreaking about what happened during the dictatorship, or unresolved things that are occurring in the United States that were brought from Albania after, you know, that happened in Albania during the dictatorship. So all these other stories come out so I end up learning so much, and people are so generous to let me take a look. And so it's really rewarding work. I love it.
So I had a question. Is this the red part? Is that the mosque motif that you also, and is that the one that we saw in the earlier?
It's like that kind of house shape. And then sometimes what's kind of branching out of it, some people think of it as a tree of life. And in other countries that were part of the Ottoman Empire, it is referred to as a mirror or, you know, sometimes you'll see it a larger form and it's like a prayer rug. So it, depending upon what country you're standing in and what context you're in, it's going to mean something different, but you'll see it like in Turkey and Romania and Bulgaria, you know, you'll see it everywhere. It's just in the Albanian context, that's what it is.
It's beautiful. And these are some of the weavers you've met, right?
Yeah. And that was also really fun, because a lot of times I would ask things like, how did you learn how to weave? Because that was another thing that, you know, in Albania in particular, they had a factory system, but the factory system were actually hand weaving. They were using their hands. It wasn't a machine. So those women that were in the factory system learned by being in the factory, whereas other women traditionally would be taught by their mother, and then there were other, so like I would talk to them about that. And then where did the designs come from? And that was also really interesting, because this is a collective in the south of Albania, and they have somebody who's referred to as a painter who comes up with designs for them and used to work in the factory system. And then they also do things, work for hire, and they talk about how they just shared their story, and, you know, oh, my mother-in-law taught me how to weave, and oh, my mom taught me how to weave, or, you know, it's like things like that. It's just really great. And like, whether they like it or not like it. And they had this really crazy old kilim that was, that I'd never seen before, that was like, that was more from the communist era and had communist motifs like trucks and stuff like that. That was really neat.
Wow, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And it's all primarily women that are weaving, or are there men? Okay.
I did not meet any men who were weaving. In the factory system, the men were the designers, the women were the makers. And another great story from interviewing these weavers, like there was one where during, again, communism, some big shot guy came from Russia to visit the factory. And so these women made a kilim that had a portrait of Lenin, and the guy, I'm forgetting his name, that who came to visit, but like he basically folded it and then he sat on it, and they were like, they wanted to laugh so bad, but they were terrified because they weren't sure if they were allowed to laugh. And it was this, you know, on the one hand, it's like really funny, but it's also kind of sad and scary that like they didn't have the freedom they were scared that if they actually expressed themselves, that they could actually get in serious trouble.
Right.
But they were like, I can't believe he's sitting on Lenin's face. I couldn't believe it.
That's so funny. Well, we've come to the end of our time. It's been perfect timing. So I wanted to let everyone know that I put some additional information in the chat. Also, there's a couple links. I found some of your essays online as well. So if you want to read some of Alexis's work, you can do that. And does anybody else have any other questions before we wrap up? I don't think there are. Our next speaker is Amanda Yates Garcia, and I hope you'll join us for that. And Alexis, this was wonderful, and I really thank you for being here. We learned a lot today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is so fun.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, everybody.
And thank you for coming, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, everybody. Thanks so much. We'll hopefully see you next month. Bye.
Bye.